Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Storyforming. Today, I want to do a film that I've wanted to do for a really long time, Crimson Tide, which was one of my favorite films from the mid 90s. Denzel Washington and Gene Hackman getting into it in a sub in a world on the brink of nuclear war. Watching this again, I watched it probably 100 times in the 90s, and then just recently, just watched it yesterday. I had remembered thinking that the story form, the interesting part about it was that Denzel Washington's character, Commander Hunter, was actually holistic, and that the story form was a holistic story form, in that he seems much more focused on relationships between people as opposed to cause and effect. And typically, when you have the two principal characters in a narrative, one has a very holistic way of seeing the world, and the other has a very linear way of seeing the world. It doesn't have to be that way, but that's usually how it works out. And so I was thinking, oh, that's the really interesting part about it, is because he's holistic. It wouldn't make any sense because A, it's a Tony Scott film, and he doesn't make holistic films. And B, it's submarines and the Navy and all that great stuff. They're typically cause and effect in solving problems. It didn't quite make much sense to me, and especially now that I have the premise builder that I created in subtext, it was way off. But what I was seeing was actually something else, so that's what I actually want to talk about here today. If I go into the premise builder here in subtext, the first thing you want to do is get the personality of the story and see where the different through lines are laid out. Because right here, these four through lines, the main character, objective story, relationship story, and influence character through line, those set the personality of the story and how it actually feels to go see it. When you look at the plot of Crimson Tide, you have an objective story where Russian revolutionaries have taken over a missile base and they're on the verge of getting the codes so that they can then launch them and attack America. Meanwhile, you have Denzel and Gene on the USS Alabama heading towards Russia to get into a position where they can do a first strike if they get the actual codes. So, right off the bat, we know that the objective story plot is in the external domain. We're not dealing with people's prejudices, we're not dealing with dysfunctional thinking, nothing like that. What we're dealing with is the external world. And so that means that the objective story plot here is either going to be in the upper right, which would be all about the physics of things, or it would be in the upper left, which is about the actual state of things. The two are similar, and sometimes people get confused as to what is what, but when you look at the physics of things, it's all about how difficult it is to actually do the things. Going on adventures, attacking people, there's a lot of that in this story. There's a lot of submarine warfare and people taking over the ship, and there's a mutiny. When the conflict is over here in universe, then the actual problems come about because of the external state of things. Not that everything is fixed, but if you look out into the world and you see how everything's aligned and see what's matching up with what, when you take that into consideration, it's not so much how difficult it is to actually do the things. If you look at Crimson Tide, it's not so much that it's difficult to drive the sub, it's not that it's difficult to launch the missiles. Being able to do that, there's no difficulty in there. Doing that kind of stuff, that's not really problematic. What is problematic is the state of the world, that there are offshoot Russian revolutionaries who are in a place that they shouldn't be, and that is creating all the conflict because them being in that place is what's driving people to freak out and assume that things are going to happen. And so it makes them jump to conclusions. And then that's the real problem. Because in a nuclear world, you can't really jump to conclusions because the consequences are so high. It's like it's too much. So you have the objective story here in universe up here in the upper left, and then you have the relationship story in order to balance it out is down here in the mind domain. So it's about fixed attitudes. So obviously this is the best place. The captain and the XO, they're just going at it from the very beginning. They have completely different ways of seeing the world, and their relationship grows through what they know. So then what happens to balance the story out is the main character and the influence character then shift into these other through lines. And that would mean that right now the current setup would be a main character who has trouble actually doing things. And they're trying to learn something or trying to achieve something and they can't quite do the things physically that they want to. Whereas here, the influence character would be influencing based on their way of thinking. That's not what's happening in this story. What's happening in this story is this is actually flipped here to the point where Denzel, Commander Hunter, is the one who has the dysfunctional way of thinking. Dysfunctional in terms of the rest of the crew. He's the one guy who thinks differently than everybody else, and that's what sets him apart from the rest of the story. The main character through line is always what is personal and unique to the main character. So here, it's not his state. It's not that he's young or that because he's a black commander or anything like that. He's not dealing with anything like that. He's not dealing with his attitude about things, that he's completely obsessed or driven towards things. He's not different than anybody else in that regard. And he's not different from everybody else in the things that he does. What's actually different is his psychology, where he's actually coming from. And this is the part that I felt was the holistic part of it. That's what I was seeing was this thing is that he's actually solving problems. He's actually getting through all the conflict by virtue of changing himself and communicating to others through a dysfunctional way of thinking, getting people to think differently. And that's that whole speech about how in the nuclear world, the only purpose to war is to serve itself, or something like that. Meanwhile, Captain Ramsey, the Gene Hackman character, he's influencing by all the things he's doing, jumping to conclusions, doing the drill when he's not supposed to, punching him, taking over the ship, that kind of stuff. That influence from Hackman and what he's doing is what's actually creating the conflict and influencing and challenging Denzel's character to stand up and to stay within his power to be able to solve the problems that are going on. The next step would be to figure out the family of elements here, whether or not it's aspirational, heavy, energetic, or contemplative. And I think if you just look at the objective story here in relation to the relationship story, you just look at these two here. If you look at the future and their drives, that's not really it. Each one of these is going to be a part of the objective story. What you're trying to identify is where the actual source of conflict is. It's not about the past. This isn't that whole kind of thing. And it's definitely not the present. There's a lot of present that goes into the story, but the conflict between them from beginning to end is not about what they actually consider. The conflict throughout the entire story is this pre-conscious. Don't hesitate when it comes time for me to give an order. You come right after me. At the end, when he's punching him and give me the missile key, all those great scenes between the two of them, that is a classic, great example of a preconscious concern. This is like one of the best ever. And then, of course, in the objective story, it's all about progress and not so much that things are getting better, but how things are getting worse. So that's like the external state of it. It's as things are getting worse, we gotta make a decision. We gotta do something to solve this problem because if we don't, it's just gonna go downhill. And then also, if we act too soon, that's gonna make things go faster and accelerate. And so that's where the source of the conflict in the story is coming from. And then, of course, Gene Hackman's character here, everything he does, my intention is to go up there and launch those missiles. We're doing this drill right now. I don't care what anybody says. All those things are what are having an impact on being Hunter's arc from beginning to end is being in a place where he can be the commander, playing the role of an actual leader. Everybody is always challenging whether or not he has the ability to actually do that. And he's coming from a place, and this is where those relationships are coming from, because a great leader is somebody who can be different things for different people in order to get them to think differently. And that's where that's coming from. So that's what I was seeing when I was thinking the holistic thing. Because if I came in here, this is just a basic one. You can solve progress when you abandon basing everything on what is proven. If you switch that to relationships, allowing your presumptions to balance out what is proven addresses facts. Okay, that would be a very different submarine movie, and that's definitely not what is going on here. It's not about people's intentions and about moving in a certain direction. It's about solving this problem. And even when he describes what will happen, it's always cause and effect. If we launch our birds too soon, then they will launch their birds, and then that'll be the end of everything. Everything he's talking about is cause and effect. He's always going by Navy regulations. The structure of the story is organized through linear thought. And that's where that's coming from, so that it's his being a certain way that is what is his own personal thing. He plays a certain role from beginning to end, and that's what separates him out from the rest of the story. Now, this is interesting because you don't typically have an action thriller like this. The main character is not typically what dramatic theory would call a beer. Their personal conflict isn't usually something that's internal, it's usually something that's external. They're the one, and they're the one that's supposed to save the day. So that is what makes this a bit of a different twist, in that you don't usually have main characters who are in this psychology domain anyways, but then to put it in a submarine film, that's what sets it apart from everything else. And then you have this argument here. Was the point of the premise? Is the point of the premise for Denzel's character to change the way that he looks at things, or is it for him to remain steadfast and stay strong in it? So obviously he is maintaining his viewpoint. So keep adapting to the world around you, which is what he's doing when he goes to talk to the different people and say, hey, think about it this way. All the great lines, obviously written by Quentin Tarantino when he came in and did a pass, the stuff about Mobius Silver Surfer and the Lippinzonner Stallions, all that stuff is him adapting to the world around him by working a certain element so that he can keep the world from devolving into a place of destruction. Clearly, the end is a triumph. They succeed. He feels good about it. He gets the promotion, all that great stuff. He was in the right. Whether or not he flows with the plot or resistance, he's putting up resistance from beginning to end. So, what that means is that because his wheelhouse is down here in psychology and things that he can think through and things that he can do, that does not jar so much with the fact that all the major plot elements are action. The Russian revolutionaries take over. There's the fire in the galley. There is the whole midpoint where they have the altercation with the other sub, the taking over of the boat when he takes over his command. And then when Gene comes back and takes the ship back, that's what you call the second act turn between Signpost 3 and Signpost 4. And then it ends when they get the right message. And then everybody cheers. Tony Scott style, everybody cheers. Those are the dynamic settings of the story. And we know the layout here. The last part is figuring out what is that crucial element that Denzel's character offers to the story. What is it that he's putting into the story that conflicts with what Gene is getting at? And that's where the fight is coming from. Because it's a steadfast story like this, it's not so much about some dilemma where the main character is forced to make a choice. In this one, the main character's on the right track, and then it's just bringing everybody to that place. So then what is that track that they're bringing him towards? And what happens is whatever that element here, which is that crucial element that'll end up here in the premise, the one that's to the opposite of that, will be how you would see Hackman's character. Obviously, proven in presumption here, there is a ton of presumption in this. We have to presume if we don't have the full message, we need to launch missiles. If you thought of one thing that's driving the conflict in the entire story, is we have a half-formed message. We don't know what it is, so can we float the buoy? All right, fine, float the buoy. But now you just told everybody where we were, and now there's a submarine launching torpedoes at us. Presume that the half-formed message means nothing, so then we need to launch. But then if you don't have the right answer, you just brought about nuclear Armageddon for the entire rest of the world. So that's clearly it. But is that where all the work is being done? That's clearly the problem. Or is there something else? So if that was the actual problem, then you would have an arc here where it's about Hunter, the way he does things. And he just has a certain way of doing things, and then that's what his problem is. It's not really what's going on here. And Hackman, he's not really driven by what's wrong. And accurate doesn't mean he gets accurate information. It means now he gets to a place where he's always working towards what's tolerable. And that's not his changed arc, because he's going to have some kind of changed arc that gets to that point. But if you look at these two here up at the top, accurate and deviation, what that means is all the work being towards, hey, this is the accurate, this is all the information we have. And if we stayed within these guidelines, we're looking at what's accurate. Deviation is what's outside of that. So it's not what's in here, and it's not what's not in here. It's what's outside of here. What is deviating from what it is that we're looking at? And that's actually where Hunter's character, that's where his focus is on. If keep adapting to the world around you, not by being faulty, but by pretty much being outside other people's tolerances, pointing out other people's inaccuracies. What was the one I ended up with? Being deficient to the purpose, working outside of someone's acceptable tolerances. Let's just use that for right now. So that's what he's doing when he's, hey, I think the fire could make this not such a good thing. And he's like, what the heck are you talking about? Are you talking to me like that? And then that would put Hackman's character in accurate. Hey, I've got the information here. This is what the rules say. We're in these guideposts. We should launch. Whereas Denzel's, hey, what if it's actually outside? And so him adapting to the world by always looking towards the deviations, always pointing out what is wrong or inadequate or faulty, that's what actually saves the day. Then you can see here he's driven by cause. So he absolutely does not want to be the person that causes World War III. He is the instigator. He's the reason for everything. And that it's the idea that, hey, everybody, you need to stop and think about what it is that you're doing because you could cause something even worse. This conversation with the kid about the Silver Surfer, it's the same exact argument. You could be promoted if you could just think about that and think about what it is that you could actually cause that would create problems. Keep that in mind all the time and you'll be better off, which he is. If you look at the arc of Gene Hackman's Hunter character, 1,000% presumption. Like I said, that's the actual problem. In the objective story plot, and what happens is the character that has the change resolve also has that same arc in them subjectively. So then we're getting to see what it's like when one person is completely obsessed with presumption. And so they make all their choices. We have to presume that this is it. I think they used the word. I was really shocked because I changed this word. Original dramatic theory was unproven, which was causing lots of problems with the writers. So I switched it to presumption. And then I found out as I watched this, they used it about 50 times, which is great. It's really fun. He goes from presumption to then proven. It's not that he's proven wrong, but just the fact that at the very end, he's ready to go for it. He's actually pulling the trigger. And then at the very end, it's fine. 3 minutes. That's proven. Let's actually get the information. Let's find out. It's the first time he's like, fine, you've got 3 minutes. That's his change. And because of that change, resolve, that's what actually solves the problem in the story. They're actually able to get the right information. And then, of course, at the very end, when they talk one more time and he says, you were right about it, he doesn't quite say that he was wrong and he was right, but that, hey, I looked it up and you were right about those stallions. Their conversation can keep going, but that's his arc, which proves this premise. If you do this, if you keep adapting to the world by pointing out what's wrong, what's inadequate, you can keep things from getting worse, and you can actually change people's presumptions to a place where they actually might check into things and validate. That's the whole thing there. So then you would build this story if it's in subtext, but thankfully I've already done that. So if I come in here and I look at Crimson Tide, you'll see the same exact premise, just with different storytelling. Keep adapting to the world around you by deviating from everyone else, and you can keep a dangerous situation from declining. So that's the meaning of the story, and that meaning of that story, because this is deviation mixed with the plot element of progress. Put those two together and you get this story form, which is the complete collection of what's supposed to happen in the story, everything all put in the right place to get across that same argument. And there's some really great things in here. Right off the bat, I've just added this in here, but you can see this is the icy crucial element. If you were to think of a central element that's most important for Gene Hackman's character to have in the film is his obsession with accuracy. The information we have is good enough, let's go for it. Whereas Denzel's Hunter character is like, hey, this could go really wrong. We're going outside of our bounds. You can't behave this way. This is outside of Navy regulation. I'm going to take over. The whole conflict in the story is about keeping the world safe, keeping democracy safe. Anytime anybody does anything in an effort to keep safe, keep the boat safe, keep the world safe, keep everybody safe from this mutiny, that creates tons and tons of conflict. What slows it down is when somebody like Denzel says, hey, let's be smart about this. And then they have that whole cool conversation about Von Clausewitz and what he means and what he's actually saying. Anytime that comes up, it's, oh, maybe we should think about this. What challenges Denzel's character over here is the fact that Ramsey has been doing this a really long time and he has an immense skill level, and everybody looks to him. Hey, you know what you're doing here. You've got all the skills. He's, hey, we can't sit around here and talk about theory and political theory. I'm just going with what I know. That is the best time to do a drill. It's not really, it's like, no, I know what it is. I've got the skills. You don't know what you're talking about. I'm going to achieve this no matter what. What, of course, brings it down as he doesn't seem really interested at all in what the facts of the situation. He could care less. And that makes him less of an impact. The influence character is somebody who would challenge Denzel's character, like, oh, maybe I should change. But then when he sees that he's not even paying attention to facts, it's like, all right, forget you, I'm out of here. And then over here, like I was saying, his dysfunctional psychology is what sets him apart from everybody else. The way that he is being that leader, his abilities are always challenged, which then when he takes over and there's that great thing where he fights back with the sub and is actually able to save the day, proves that he has the actual abilities, he has that talent, and he does right here. He just has the natural talent for being able to relate to people, to be that great leader. It's not so much about the skill to get it done and to attack and to win, but actually to have an ability to relate to one another. His flaw, the thing that keeps him out, is value, which the only thing I can think of right now, right off the bat, is that it's his value in terms of what all the other sailors think. It's like the EXO's a pain. He went to Harvard. He's supposed to be smarter than me. And so why do we really need this person here? Why do we need you to repeat the messages? You have no real value here except to be a pain in the butt. And that makes it more difficult for him to finish it and gives other people, all the other seamen, reason to doubt his ability to go against him. I love this because this condition of their relationship, why they're together, is they have completely different ways of doing things. Doing it by the book, this is not the procedure. All their arguments are about procedure. And the end, the admonition from the review board at the end when they go to court is all about you guys weren't thinking of the consequences of your actions, and that's where your problem is. Their ultimate confidence in each other is what drives them crazy, and then of course what they know is what gives them pause. And the whole pre-conscious thing, if you went through from beginning to end, every single argument, it just looks like Hackman wants to beat the crap out of Denzel. Oh, and that's another thing too. A really great example of Denzel's way he changes the world is by adapting himself. It's the perfect example of it because he gets hit. And so what he does is he takes the ring, puts it around his neck, and he's, come on, hit me again. That's somebody who's solving problems by adapting themselves to the world, by changing themselves in order to affect change around them. A doer would have attacked. He was just like, nope, I'm coming into myself. And what's more important to you? Is it important to win or is it important to save the rest of the world? How valuable we are with each other? The short list comment, that's a complete issue of value. All these connect together in order to communicate this message of keep adapting to the world around you by deviating from everyone else, and you can keep a dangerous situation with your client. So really quickly, just a real quick look at the individual scenes. And the one I wanted to point out, which I thought was really interesting, is right here at the midpoint. This is where Denzel's character takes over and pretty much closes off Gene Hackman, puts him in lockup, and that's it. It's okay, here, I'm taking over. This is what's going to happen. And that closure is brought to it. So then looking at that whole section from the midpoint to when Hackman returns to take back the bridge, these knowledge, ability, this is when Denzel's character is really called to task, whether he has the ability to be able to do that. The desire at the end, everybody is drawn towards him because he's able to manufacture that success against the other Russian sub. Their whole conflict in here is repeat my order. If you don't, I'll have somebody to replace you. You can't do the actual job. And then meanwhile here, Captain is really just obsessed with his self-interest, what's best for the rest of the crew. He affects that in the people that actually do the mutiny. When they're here and they're talking to Viggo Mortensen's character, that's the influence character perspective. It's being proxied through those other guys, James Gandolfini and the other two guys. They're the ones who are communicating the influence character perspective, which is then challenging other characters to deal with that. And here it would be Viggo Mortensen. Hey man, think of your wife. That's altruism. I am actually. That's where the problems in the story are coming from. And then again, here in the last act, you can see the influence character is brought to a place where at the very beginning, he's very instinctual. It's like, I'm going off my gut instinct from the very beginning. And I'm going to train them in the whole galley thing. You know what? This is a perfect time for a drill. By the end of it, he's at a place like, all right, we're doing the steps. We're going up to launch depth. We're going to do this. And then right here is when he breaks, when he starts looking at and analyzing all the different things that are going on. And then he's like, fine, I'll do what you want. That's somebody who's dealing with other people's preconditions and is able to get to a place where the day is safe. That's the most I'm going to go into this story form. It's a really great example of a main character who is in a submarine film directed by Tony Scott, but what sets him apart from everybody else isn't that he has a holistic mindset and that he's trying to manage inequities by dealing with relationships and changing the balance of relationships and managing those. What he's really doing is he's doing linear cause and effect, but he's doing it by being a certain way and by having a dysfunctional way of thinking that deviates from what other people are thinking. And that's what's needed to save the day when you're living in a nuclear world. So that's it for this episode of Story Forming. If you have any questions about anything, leave comments below or contact me directly, and I'll see you next time.